I've been a trucker since my mid-20s. I've had many odd experiences on the road. I'm pretty sure that I've come across a couple of UFOs while driving late at night and encountered many strange drivers at times. However, the encounter I'm going to share today is by far the most terrifying and strange experience I've ever had. This happened on a country road in the middle of Kansas when I was 37. The year was 2009. The night started off like most nights, which consisted of me driving and listening to some music on the radio, usually drinking some coffee to keep myself from getting too tired. As I drove through the night on the empty road, I had noticed that it began to get foggy. This fog eventually became very thick, and I started thinking to myself whether I should pull over for a while, as I could barely see ahead, or keep driving. I thought about it, and decided to continue on. There were 0 other people so far out driving in the middle of the country, so maybe it was safer than I thought. I still took precaution. I was going slowly, just in case an animal or something were to run across the road. As I continued driving, I started to pick up an odor. This odor was the most foul thing I've ever smelled, and it soon filled the inside of my truck. I quickly closed the windows, but that didn't help. This terrible smell was already inside, and I felt as if I was going to vomit. The smell and the fog became overwhelming. I remember thinking to myself, what in the world could be causing such an awful stench? In that same moment, I felt that unpleasant feeling when you know you're about to throw up. I had no choice but to quickly stop the truck and open the door to empty my stomach. When I was finished, I quickly covered my face, as that horrible smell was still in the air. I closed the door and prepared myself to start driving again. And that's when I noticed something ahead crossing the road. The figure was unmistakably a man, and this man appeared to be limping. Other than his limping, I also noticed that the man was wearing an old white button shirt and black suspenders. I recall thinking to myself how strange and freaky the situation was, and not knowing what to do. I decided that I was just going to ask if he was okay, and if I should call anyone for help. Before I was able to drive up to him, I soon noticed that 4 more people came out from the side of the road, all walking in the same direction as the first man I saw. Each of them were walking in that same odd limping gait, all of them wearing outdated farming clothes. What I found even more strange was the fact that they didn't acknowledge the huge truck that was on the other side of the road. I thought to myself, if these people needed help, then surely they would come to me. However, all of them continued limping across the road, disappearing into the darkness and the fog. I must also remind you we were in the middle of Kansas, so basically the middle of nowhere. Just then, another figure emerged from the darkness and began to cross the road too. However, this figure was far smaller. I soon realized that this was a child. I got out of my truck, but I did not go up to the kid. Rather, I stared at him as he continued to cross the road. This child was also walking in a weird way, and was wearing that old clothing too. Right when he was about to make it to the other side, I said aloud, "Do any of you need help?" The child stopped, turning his head to face me. My heart sank all the way to my feet as soon as I saw his face. I wasn't looking at the face of an ordinary child. I was looking at the face of a corpse. I cursed under my breath and stood there in fear. This thing then let out the most awful scream I've ever heard and began to limp towards me, but at a quicker speed than before. I quickly got back inside the truck and slammed the door shut. In that very moment, I heard even more of those horrifying screams and saw more of these things beginning to emerge from the darkness. I quickly swerved around the kid, speeding out of there as quick as I could. During that whole ordeal, I saw the faces of the other ones that were coming, and they all had the face of decomposed corpses. Once I made it back to civilization, I stopped at a gas station. I just sat there in my truck. My mind and heart were still racing and had no idea what to think. This experience opened me up to many things. I feel like I understand that this world is indeed strange, and there might always be things which we do not understand.
My name is Allie, and I'm from Germany. I have experienced this incident when I was 12 years old. One day, I went to my grandparents' house to stay for a while. The house was quite an old one and was located in a pretty isolated area. When I arrived there, it was already late and dark outside. I stayed with my grandmother in the living room, and then I asked her a question. "Granny, what was the scariest thing you've experienced?" She replied, "Well, I think you're too young to hear it, dear." However, I kept convincing her to tell me her story. For your information, my grandma has a backstory when she comes from an old, small village in Turkey where still people ride on horses. Eventually, she began the story. "It's not my fault if you can't sleep tonight." She asked me if I know how the devil looked like, and I said they look like red men with spikes on their forehead. "Well, the devil has a split tongue, and he has only 3 fingers on both hands. The fingernails are so sharp that they could slice the meat almost in half, and the air he is breathing is dead souls." Her description was so detailed that I could almost imagine clearly, and I was a bit scared, and she then told me that she once had seen him a few years ago. It has become bright in front of her eyes when she had a heart attack, and then she saw something red thing approaching her. She could see him clearly, and it was definitely something else.
"It's time to go,"
he said to her, but she refused. "I didn't commit any sin. Why are you going to take me?" Then Satan replied,
"Silence! You're going to come with me."
She yelled, "No!" He stared at her for a moment and opened his mouth.
"No one ever comes back to me. You are going to regret it later."
When he disappeared, my grandma finally woke up from a coma, and she realized that 2 years have been passed. My mom told her that her brother got lung cancer and nearly died. After leaving the hospital, she went to visit him, asking if he had seen something. "That night, I saw a red man, and he said like this, 'She doesn't want to come.'"
"So you have to come with me,"
he replied. After that, my grandma told about him to the whole family. Everyone believed it except me, who was a little kid. "Granny, I don't remember." "I know. You were pretty young at that time, sweetie." After finishing drinking a hot chocolate, I ended up going to bed. However, I couldn't close my eyes because of the story that my grandma had told me. Then, I suddenly heard someone open the door that I had locked. There was a clock in the room. When I saw the clock, I could see that it said 4:61 a.m. There is no way that 61 minutes can exist. Something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and turned on the lights. And there he was, the red man, Satan. Being scared, I screamed at the top of my lungs. I immediately hid under my blankets, and that's when I felt a sharp pain on my left arm.
should have listened to me.
That's only what I heard at that moment. After a few seconds, my grandpa ran into the room with his baseball bat, but he was already disappeared. While he was driving me to the hospital, he kept praying on the way. It took around 30 minutes to drive to the nearest hospital, and I eventually had to stitch my wound on my arm. This happened 6 years ago, but I still have scars on my arm. Thankfully, I have not been encountered something like this anymore.